Hi, it's Easy Ann, and I'm coming to you from a space of grace and ease. And I have a wonderful guest, my friend that I met in Houston many years ago. She is an author, she is a breath worker, she is a genius at life, and I would and I love her very much. I'd like to present to you Leah Holtzman. And Leah is going to talk to you a little bit about what made your life easier, what makes her life easier, and hopefully will make your life easier. And I think today, Leah, you said you're going to talk to us about breathing and how that makes our lives easier.
Indeed. We met at a conscious breathing seminar in Houston, and we discovered that we had Leonard Orr in common and conscious breathing or rebirthing. And breathing makes my life a lot easier. I mean, if you stop and think about it, when you're breathing, you're alive, and when you're not breathing, you're not alive. So it's the most important thing that we actually do in life. And yet, most of us don't get much education about it. We don't get much training. And everybody says, well, I'm breathing, I'm alive. And that's true. And
Can I stop? Let me stop you one, because I think that's a really important thing, and that is that we do not get educated on how to breathe. That's an amazing statement. You'd think that we just naturally breathe.
And
Right.
We do. Well, we naturally breathe, but I don't know what is right and what is not right.
Effectively.
Right, effectively. And, in our conscious breathing classes, we were taught a certain breath. And then there's yogic breathing and there's breathing in Lamaze. And, more and more people are recommending breathing. But I have noticed that the breath can be very, very suppressed. It gets suppressed by trauma in our childhood and stuff. And so people aren't really breathing freely. They're breathing, but it's very suppressed. And I know when I started conscious breathing back in the late 70s, and we were playing around with our breath and doing some connected breathing, which is connecting the inhale to the exhale and just breathing 100% of the time. Suddenly I became aware of my breath and I went, oh my gosh, I'm holding my breath most of the time. So the more I pay attention to my breath, the more I realize that if I get stressed out or, when I'm talking, I'm not really breathing. I have to stop talking, take a breath. So, if people are talking a lot, they may not take a breath for a long, long time. So it's really a wonderful idea to be aware of your breath because it's life.
So you've said a couple of important things here, and that one of those is to pay attention to our breath, to actually watch it and see what's going on with it, pay attention to what's going on. And then the other one is what you're saying is if we're talking with someone and we don't stop, that we don't take a breath, that we are breathless.
Right, exactly. We just keep talking and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And some people talk faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And I can hardly handle that because I'm paying attention to their breath and I'm thinking, my God, they haven't taken a breath in a really, really long time. So I think about, if you have a document, a written document, you have paragraphs. I think of the breath when you're talking along. Stop and take a breath when it should be a paragraph or when you're changing topics. You've got to introduce a breath. So as you said, so people can integrate what you said. Give them chunks of information.
I think one of the problems with that is that when we're in conversation with other people and there's several people, that if you take a breath, somebody's going to jump in and they're going to take over the conversation. We're kind of conversation hogs sometimes in our lives. However,
people like to talk, and some people are over talkers. They talk more than their share, or it's kind of compulsive. It's compulsive talking. They have to talk. They have to talk. And I'm not particularly a compulsive talker. I have other compulsions I deal with, but I listen more than I talk, unless I'm given permission to talk. I've got permission to talk, so it's okay. I'm talking. But I always felt like, gosh, if I eat compulsively, I'm using food. And if I drink compulsively, I'm using liquor or whatever. And if somebody is compulsively talking, then they're using my listening, because they have to have somebody listening so that they can talk. So that's kind of a side.
Well, I do want to say something about that, and that is that when somebody is compulsively talking, it's a wall, and a wall is built to keep people out. It thwarts intimacy. So, and what it does is when somebody is a talkaholic, they drive people away.
A talkaholic.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And so thanks for bringing that up. That's great points, Leah.
Good. Thank you. Well, not too long ago, a few years ago, I found a CD by Andrew Weil, Dr. Andrew Weil, and he's a medical doctor, and he's also very holistic, and he's very, very famous now. And I was very interested in what a medical doctor had to say about breathing. That was the name of the CD, Breathing. And so I actually transcribed it. I used to be a legal secretary, so I've got great secretarial skills and typing skills that has served me so well. I am so glad I have those skills. I learned those skills before there were computers, so I'm really grateful for that. But one of the things that really stood out in that CD was he said that breathing is 70% of the body's elimination system. And I went, what? That's very odd. I thought it would be going to the bathroom and sweating and stuff like that. Not so. So when you know that, it's like, oh my God, if my breath is suppressed, if I'm not breathing because I'm talking all the time, or I'm not breathing because I'm stressed out, I am compromising my elimination system.
Wow. And that impacts everything. Are you hearing a feedback?
Maybe just a teeny bit.
I'm hearing a loud feedback. I don't know what it is, like if something gets moved on your desk or the mouse.
No.
Do
you think it's coming from me?
I don't know. I'm not doing anything on this end. I just didn't know if you're moving on that end.
No, I'm not touching anything.
Okay, so I noticed that, yes, when I asked that, I did ask that question. I'm just looking at my breath while that was going on. Yeah, it does somewhat suppress the breath. So yeah, thank you for that. So continue. I just wanted to check that out.
Oh, good. Okay, well, I apologize if there's feedback. As Ann says, nobody's perfect.
Well, I mean, we don't know, we can't do anything about it. I don't think it's interfering with anything. And that's the way life is. There are a lot of unexpected things that come. And if we grasp to try to change them when we can't, we suffer. And so EZosophy really is about how do we eliminate ego-driven struggle and suffering from our lives, because a small sound is not something that should just drive us to suffering.
Exactly. And your EZosophy philosophy, I was just like, oh my God, that is absolutely incredible. And I became an EZosopher, EZosophist. I'm not sure what your terminology is, but I tell people about that regularly. I think life should be easy, and if not easy, at least easier. And I thank you so much for that, because that has made my life a lot easier.
Thank you. So you were talking about Andrew Weil, and that you said that amazingly, and I'm just astounded that it's 70% of our elimination, and that really impacts our immune system and probably the chemicals in our body. Like our emotions are probably impacted by that as well.
Huge. It's huge. And because, I don't really know that much about that kind of stuff, I can't talk a whole lot about that, but you don't have to be real smart when somebody says it's 70% of your elimination system.
Yeah, really. It's like,
Oh my God. Well, stop and think about it. That's like saying, well, you only poop 30% of the time. You'd be in big trouble there. So you can just translate it. So that made me even more determined to make sure that I spend time in my daily life just focusing on breathing. And if you stop and think about it, there are a lot of meditations, and all they say is focus on your breath. Just be aware of your breath. And, they might be a nose breath, breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Might be a breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And in some instances, some people breathe through the mouth. I don't recommend doing that, as your regular breathing, but it has its benefits. And one of them is that you can just get a lot more oxygen in and out of the body, because the mouth hole is a lot bigger than the two nose holes. That's pretty obvious, but who thinks about it? Whoever says that? So then I recommend one deep breath through the mouth. And I do that when I'm emotional, when I'm upset, or I'm afraid, or I'm getting stressed out. I go, wait a minute. I got to stop and take a breath. Otherwise, the nose is for breathing, and I breathe through that. But I have a couple of little tools. What I've noticed, especially in the rebirthing community, is you can rebirth yourself.
Some people may not know what rebirthing community is, so you might want to.
Well, Leonard Orr was the founder of rebirthing, and rebirthing is just a simple breathing technique where you connect your breath, breathing in and out, 100% of the time. You don't stop breathing. You don't talk. You just lie there. You lie down, and you can have a rebirther, somebody to guide you through whatever happens with that. And it's quite amazing what might happen if you lay down and relax and breathe for an hour. So you and I both were involved in that community, and it was just primarily the focus was breathing. And what I noticed is I would say, okay, I'm going to lay down and just breathe for 5 minutes. Just focus my breath, because when you're breathing, you're alive. And when you're not breathing, you aren't alive. So it's so important. It's so important with our elimination system. Doesn't it logically make sense to spend a little bit of time doing nothing but breathing, 100% breathing? And what I noticed for me is I would have the intention of breathing. I'd lay down or sit up and just say, okay, I'm just going to breathe for the next 5 minutes. And I start my breathing, and lo and behold, a few minutes later, I'm off thinking and I'm not breathing. It's not all that easy to focus on your breath. I mean, it's called meditation in many ways. So I came up with what they call these days a breathing hack, a tool that would keep me focused on my breathing. And in rebirthing, we used to do something people still do called wet rebirthing, where you would go into a hot tub or a bathtub and you would put your snorkel in your mouth. Can you hear me breathing?
And breathe underwater.
And breathe underwater. You'd have a nose clip on. And I found that to be one of the most relaxing things ever. I still do that. I go to my hot tub at my apartment complex and I take my snorkel, and I use a face mask nowadays. And I lay down in that hot tub and I just breathe and I float and I relax. Well, that's really cool. But a lot of times it's not easy to go to the hot tub, and then you got to wash your hair. It's complicated. And maybe people do it in the bathtub. That's a little less complicated, but you still got to run the bath water and you get wet and your hair gets wet and you got to wash your hair. So it's more complicated. So I thought, you know what? I'm just going to lie down on my bed on my side. I'm going to put the snorkel in my mouth. I'm just going to let it'll just relax onto your head. And so I lie in bed and I breathe through the snorkel. And one of the things I've found about breathing through the snorkel is it kind of extends your windpipe. You can breathe deeper, and I don't forget about breathing when I've got this thing in my mouth. It calls my attention to it. So I'll lay down in bed on my side, put my snorkel in, and especially if I'm upset. I'm a very emotional, sensitive person, and I have to manage my emotions. And one of the ways I manage my emotions is with my breath. And one of the ways, one of my tools, my breathing hack is a snorkel, because I don't forget about breathing when I've got this thing in my mouth. So
that's a brilliant idea. I can see how that would focus you.
Totally and completely focused.
And how long would you recommend? Now, for someone who has not done any conscious breathing exercises, we know that we don't start out and like breathe an hour or something. That's a little overwhelming for the system. How long for someone that was just beginning to do that when they were upset would you recommend?
Well, you could start off with 30 seconds. You could start off with a minute and see how it feels. If it doesn't feel good, stop and do something else. But keep working up so that you're breathing more. If I lay down and relax and breathe for 5 minutes, I pat myself on the back and say, good job, Leah. And it makes me feel better.
That's great. Well, there is some studies that say that it takes 9 minutes of conscious breathing to tether the mind. And so,
know that.
Yeah, so the mind will go wild. And so if you can learn some breathing technique, but what we're talking about here really is clearing the emotions. And so it sounds like maybe for 5 minutes with you just breathing that you are able to get to a calmer place in a pretty short time if you use this method.
For me, it helps. I've never heard the 9-minute thing, so thank you for telling me that. Maybe I'll have to lay down and time myself and see if I can breathe for 9 minutes. It's not that easy to lay down and relax and breathe, you know? And then suddenly you think of something that you desperately need to do, pull that thing out of your mouth and you're off and running, you know? So start off slow. You can build, you know, make 9 minutes. I'll make 9 minutes my goal. So thank you for that information. And just start off with 30 seconds. See if you can do that. And if you can, keep going until it doesn't feel comfortable. Sometimes your throat gets a little dry. You know, stop and take a sip of water and see how it feels. So play with your breath. Make it your friend. It is your friend. It keeps you alive. So unless you want to say something else about that, I have one other little breathing hack. I love these hacks on Facebook. You know, they tell you hacks for all the things you can do with vinegar and all the things you can do with baking soda and all that kind of stuff, and household hacks, you know, putting a spoon on boiling, all those things. I just love those. So I'm calling these my breathing hacks. The other way that I focus my breath, sometimes I don't have time to lay down. I don't want to lay down. And so what I do is I get a straw, you know, it's a little bit, and I cut it in half. And this is one of a little bit thicker, the kind that a little bit wider hole, the kind that you get at Starbucks and like that. And so what I do is I put it in my mouth. And I might walk around the house. I might clean the house. But I do it because I realize my breath is suppressed. I'm not breathing freely, or I'm upset. And so I put it in my mouth. God, that feels so good. I don't want to stop. But you know where I learned this from? I learned this from a man who was quitting smoking. And I thought, now that is absolutely brilliant. So what he would do, he would pretend it's a cigarette. It's about the same size as a cigarette. You could probably measure it to a cigarette if you wanted to. But he put it in his mouth and he pretended like it was a cigarette. Because if you stop and think about cigarettes, what people are doing is they're focusing on their breath. They're taking a deep breath in, and then they're taking a breath and letting it go. They're focusing for, you know, I think it takes about minutes to smoke a cigarette. So he would take it and pretend. You want to really, really pretend. And he would go. Now, I'm not encouraging cigarette smoking. I mean, it's kind of like a little bit of an unhealthy meditation, but it produces results for people because it helps people calm down. And one of the reasons it helps them calm down is because they're focusing on their breath. They've got something in their hand. They're putting it into their mouth. We're very oral fixated. At least I am. And I can feel the sensation of pleasure just doing that. And it's just a wonderful way if you are a smoker and you want to quit or you want to smoke less. Get yourself a straw, cut it in half, and then smoke this instead of your cigarettes. So that's my straw breathing hack.
That's wonderful. Very neat.
Creative, don't you think?
Yes, it is. It's super creative. Thank you so much, Leah. I appreciate those. I think those are brilliant. That certainly makes me think a lot. I mean, I have been into breathing for, it seems like forever, and yet there are always new vistas to uncover. And I am always deeply surprised at how much I suppress my breath. So awareness is the key, being aware that the breath is suppressed, because I'm sure that when people started listening to this, the moment that we mention breath, probably what happened very naturally without people going, oh my God, they just take a deeper breath.
They do.
It's just when someone says, be aware of your breath, we just naturally inhale more.
All right. I wasn't breathing. And one of the things I'm so pleased about is I've noticed on TV shows, that somebody will be getting upset and someone will actually say, take a breath. So it's becoming more mainstream. People are learning the power of breath. And I am so pleased and I'm so grateful that you had me on. It was a great opportunity because rarely do I get to share those kind of strange things that I do and have it be okay.
Well, I think that is absolutely wonderful. There is a saying in our belief in some traditions that we are given a certain amount of breaths during our lives. And so if we breathe short breaths, we have a shorter life. And if we breathe long, deep breaths, then we have a longer life. And so this would encourage that, I'm sure. Thank you again so very much. And I want to remind everyone of one thing for sure, and that is that I love you. Leah, you got anything to say? And I love you too, Leah.
I know you do. I love you too, and I'm so grateful to have you in my life. And I love all of those who have listened to this, and I do hope that it makes a difference in your life and makes your life easier.
Make it easier.